Do you want to grow the value of your Pokemon card collection significantly while spending the least amount of money as possible? I was able to grow my collection from this to this, all in only 5 years while only investing a small principal. The best part? Since that initial investment, I haven't spent a single dollar on Pokemon cards from my salary or other forms of income. When I first got back into the hobby in 2020, I was just buying whatever cards I liked and had no intention of investing.
Hey, what's up everybody? Jake here.
Most of the cards I purchased were only a few dollars each, but as I bought more and more cards, the total added up quickly. To prevent myself from spending my entire life savings on Pokemon cards, I decided to set a cap to my spending on the hobby. This means that once I hit that cap, whenever I wanted to buy new cards to add to my collection, I forced myself to sell some of the cards from my collection. Of course, that also means in order to grow the value of my collection, I had to sell the cards I bought at a profit. If I sold cards at the same price I paid for them, the overall value of my collection would stay the same, and if I sold cards for less than what I paid for them, my collection would decrease in value and I'd have less money to buy new cards with. I've always primarily been a collector with dreams of having way more cards in my collection than I can afford, and by setting a limited budget for myself, it made it that much harder to grow my collection. But this limitation was actually the driving force that pushed me to think strategically and to consider my Pokemon card purchases from not solely my standpoint as a collector, but from an investment standpoint as well. But over the years, I've learned several important lessons, and as you can tell by the title of this video, I've been able to grow the value of my collection by over 100 times the principal. Since this is my first YouTube video ever, I'll be sharing all of the tips and lessons I've learned over these past 5 years at a very high level. If you'd like to see more in-depth videos on a specific category, or if you have any questions at all, let me know in a comment below. Of course, if you're just an average collector and your goal is to enjoy the hobby and to just buy what you like, then this video may not be super helpful for you, but hopefully you can at least enjoy seeing parts of my collection. If on the other hand, you're someone who wants to grow the value of your collection while enjoying it at the same time, then hopefully these tips will be helpful for you. With all that being said, let's get right into it. Let's talk about something that's harder than it sounds in the Pokemon card world: patience. When you're trying to grow your collection and make money, it's easy to want quick wins. You buy cards hoping their value skyrockets overnight. But the truth? It rarely works like that. Patience is key, but why is it so difficult? For starters, the excitement of instant results makes us rush decisions, and the fear of missing out can push us into impulsive buys or sales. Plus, watching your investment sit without immediate gains can feel frustrating. The journey to grow my collection from what I started with to what it is today was not easy. The Pokemon market was completely different in 2020, and it took a much longer time for cards to increase in value. For many cards, it took weeks or even months before I was able to sell them to realize gains, and more often than not, I was only profiting a few dollars at a time. Since I've limited my budget and have to sell cards in order to buy new ones, there have been many times where I've sold cards too early and even at a loss because I was impatient. Over the years, I've lost a considerable amount of money from selling cards too early because I was impatient. Here's the reality: building real value can take time. In today's market, we've seen cards double, triple, or quadruple in value overnight, but that's not the norm. And as a side note, if you follow all the tips in this video, you may be able to find those opportunities and capitalize on those short-term gains. But generally, the market moves slowly, trends fluctuate, and only with patience will you avoid costly mistakes. So if you want to succeed in this hobby, embrace patience. If you can afford to, hold on to cards that you believe will go up in value over time. Just like in traditional investments, the Pokemon market experiences market cycles. As a current example, there's been a shift from modern to vintage and mid-era sets over the last couple of months. Vintage is my favorite era, and I've purchased many vintage cards over these last 5 years. There were some that I've sold in order to afford new cards to buy, but some I sold partly out of impatience, as at the time, it seemed like vintage cards would never see a huge spike in demand and thus value. However, I thankfully have been patient with most of my vintage cards. Although I'll most likely never sell them, as they're sentimental to me and are some of my favorite cards in my collection, I'm using them as an example to show you that by being patient, I've seen some of the largest increases in the value of my collection over the years. The most important thing I considered that helped me grow my collection was doing research and putting in the time. Like traditional investments, knowledge is extremely important. The more you know about the hobby, the higher chance you'll have at making a smart investment. If you're like me, there's an infinite amount of cards that I can come across that I want to add to my collection. I've always been a pretty compulsive buyer, and even to this day I have a terrible habit of buying any card or any slab that pops up on my newsfeed that I think is cool. But if your goal is to grow the value of your collection the fastest, especially if you have a limited budget like me, the smarter thing to do is to research before you buy anything. Watch YouTube videos, read online posts, join Discord groups, and chat with other like-minded collectors. Like anything, whether it's school, whether it's your job, you need to spend time researching and putting in the work. Researching cards is a very broad topic. It encompasses many different topics like knowledge, just general knowledge of knowing what cards even exist, learning about the market, tracking prices in cards that are currently popular, and also predicting what cards or sets will pop off in the future. The biggest gains in my collection have been from purchases I've made after gathering as much information as possible before buying the cards. What I found most helpful is watching YouTube videos from Pokemon collectors with varying backgrounds. For example, a Pokemon vendor, which is something that's become popular over the last couple years, vendor POVs, might have one opinion on a card or set. They're on the ground and they know what's happening on a day-to-day or a weekly basis. A regular Pokemon card YouTuber might have a different opinion.
Hey, what's up everybody? Jake here.
As a couple recent examples, Mega cards have grown significantly in value earlier this year with a leak that the next main set following the Scarlet and Violet era would be MEO1. For those of you who don't know, Mega cards were never popular. For the longest time, only a handful of collectors really wanted those cards, so they were cheap and affordable. Once I saw the news that the next era of cards would be focused on Megas, I immediately looked into buying some of those slabs. The value of those slabs has already increased quite significantly from what they were before the announcement, but I knew that only a small population of collectors had the time to follow leaks and news daily. Which again is why research is so important. By conducting research, you can gain knowledge about the hobby that others may not have. Knowledge is an invaluable resource for finding specific cards or sets that will go up in value and ultimately grow the value of your collection. Like traditional investments, diversifying your Pokemon portfolio reduces the risk that the value of your collection will go down if there's a downturn in any single segment of the market, and it increases the likelihood that you'll own items that appreciate in value over time. There are many different ways to diversify when it comes to Pokemon collecting. You can buy cards of your favorite Pokemon, you can buy cards drawn by your favorite artist, cards from different eras like Vintage, Mid-Era, Modern, or you can buy cards of different languages. Like I mentioned earlier, when I first got back into the hobby, I bought whatever I thought was cool. As you're seeing on screen, most of these cards were random singles, meaning my portfolio consisted almost entirely of one type of product, and I wasn't diversifying. Once I put more time in and did more research, I discovered channels like Twice Baked
Hey, what's
Jay,
up everybody?
who
Jake
showcased
here.
Japanese cards and talked about what made them special. Japanese cards have better print quality than English cards, often have better texture, and also are more affordable in many cases. There's also many countless exclusive promos that are only available in Japanese. After doing the research and watching some of those videos, I fell in love with a lot of the Japanese cards. Here are a few of the Japanese exclusive promos that I added to my collection, and a lot of these have grown significantly in value over the last few years. Eventually, I learned that grading cards was another opportunity to significantly increase the value of my collection. I did a ton of research and decided that PSA slabs were the best for me. PSA is widely regarded as the king of grading companies when it comes to Pokemon cards, due to its reputation and longevity in the market and broad market acceptance. At the time, I didn't have a PSA membership, which was required to get your cards graded with PSA, but through research I found a couple reliable middleman services that would submit your cards for you. Basically, all the cards I sent in my submission came back with good grades and were worth significantly more than they were ungraded. The last thing I want to mention about PSA slabs is that they are by far the most popular and therefore the most liquid slabs. Liquidity is one of the most important factors you need to consider if you're going to be selling your cards or your slabs. As you may have seen from vendor POV videos on YouTube, most vendors will only buy PSA slabs as they're the most liquid and easiest to move. The last main way I diversified my portfolio was by buying sealed products. It's no secret that buying sealed Pokemon products is one of the safest ways to invest long term. As you can see on screen, once I moved to a bigger house and I had more space, I started my sealed collection. Since then, I've added a variety of sealed products like PC ETBs, booster boxes, booster bundles, Japanese booster boxes and exclusive stuff, and more. And one thing to note is that it was much easier to collect sealed products even just a couple years ago. Most of my sealed collection was from large retail stores like GameStop, Target, the Pokemon Center, even Costco, before it became the mess that it is today. I plan on making an entire separate video on all the tips and tricks that I've learned to successfully cop restocks and buy new releases at MSRP today, so stay tuned if you'd like to see that video. Another tip I've done is buying multiple of the same card or the same slab if I'm confident that it'll go up in value. As an example, I bought a few Mega Rayquaza Celebration PSA 10s after the recent leak of the Storm Emeralda trademark. For those of you who don't know, the Pokemon Company trademarks names for the upcoming sets many months in advance. The most recent leak involved what many are speculating to be a Mega Rayquaza focused set, as Rayquaza is the mascot of Pokemon Emerald, and the new era of Pokemon cards is the Mega Era. Since I'm diligent with my research and do my best to stay up to date with this information, I quickly searched for Mega Rayquaza cards that I believe will go up in value. Most of the Mega Rayquaza cards were already extremely expensive, and I wasn't willing to risk buying those. However, I decided that the Celebrations Mega Rayquazas were an affordable price range, where I could buy multiple without breaking the bank. And they look like a card that other people may want to buy in the future when the new set comes out. Additionally, as many of you know, the 30th anniversary is coming out next year, and many are speculating that Celebrations cards will go up in value, as Celebrations is the 25th anniversary set. One of the most common suggestions I've seen is to simply buy what you like. The idea is that if you buy what you like, you won't care if the value of the card goes up or down, since you'll be leaving it in your PC anyways. I generally agree with that suggestion. As you can see, I tend to follow it, and I have generally cards that I like, slabs that I think are cool sealed products. That being said, if your main goal is to grow the monetary value of your collection, I'd argue that some of the purchases I've made the most money on and seen the biggest value increase are from purchases I made when thinking about what other people like. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if I think a card is cool. What matters is what the general population thinks. So to maximize your gains, consider what the average Pokemon collector would want to buy and add to their collection. For example, you can buy cards of popular Pokemon like Charizard and Umbreon. As you can see on screen, I purchased several Pikachu cards, even though Pikachu isn't one of my favorite Pokemon. I bought them because I know other people like Pikachu. It's probably one of the most popular Pokemon. And over time, I fell in love with a lot of these cards, so I'll probably never sell them from my PC anyways. But I do think they're a good example to show you that buying cards what other people like, and not necessarily what I liked, helped my collection grow in value significantly. Here's an example where I applied all the tips I laid out in this video. In 2020, I wanted to diversify my collection from solely collecting English single cards, so I did some research and came across a Japanese exclusive Hoopa XY Full Art movie promo. I'm personally not a fan of Hoopa, but I love the Pokemon in the background of the card. Shiny Mega Rayquaza and Pikachu riding a Mega Latios, for example. And more importantly, I thought that others would like it too, and would want to add a copy to their collection. I found a PSA 10 graded slab of the card on eBay and bought it for $80. I loved the art and wanted to keep it in my PC, but I ultimately decided that I'd only sell it if it grew 10 times in value, which at the time was extremely unrealistic. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and the card absolutely blew up. It can be hard to keep track of the value of all the cards in your collection, especially as your collection grows, so I've also found it helpful to keep track of each card I buy and the price I paid for them for future reference in an Excel sheet. Since I research Pokemon cards and the current hottest cards often, I saw the Hoopa movie promo was blowing up and had sold for over $2,000 in a PSA 10. Of course, a lot of this might have been market manipulation, and there's arguably no way a card should rise in value exponentially in such a short amount of time. And I can make a whole separate video discussing market manipulation, how to spot it, etc. But to stop myself from rambling, the reality was the Hoopa had jumped past the limit price I set. I immediately listed my copy of the card on eBay and Marketplace. I received messages and offers over the next few days, and ultimately sold the card at a price that was more than my limit price. I've had many success stories like this over the years that have helped me grow my collection exponentially. And lastly, as you're seeing on screen, I still have a PSA 10 copy of this Hoopa. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's a card that you really like or you really believe will go up in value over time, or you think it's currently just super undervalued, it's a good idea to buy multiple copies of the card. Alright, that's all I have for today's video. I tried to keep it short and concise while hopefully providing you with some useful tips that will help you grow your own collection. I'll be putting out more Pokemon content and more videos that hopefully you'll enjoy, so feel free to leave a comment below if there's anything you'd like to see me discuss in my next video. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video. Peace!